WNBA free agency off to a blazing start. We got news coming out of the desert in Phoenix, Arizona. The unicorn, Satou Sabally, will not be returning to the Phoenix Mercury. I told you this new CBA free agency, it is changing the entire landscape.
Free agency just exploded in Phoenix as Satou Sabally, the versatile unicorn forward who can handle, score, and stretch the floor from anywhere, is choosing to walk away from the Phoenix Mercury after only one season, not via trade or release but by her own decision to leave. And this isn't a quiet exit either, with multiple teams already lining up meetings and preparing serious offers, raising a massive question. How does a roster that was just one series away from a championship suddenly lose a key piece of its core?
Will not be returning to Phoenix. Now, I guarantee if the CBA wasn't the way it was and they could afford 3 maxes and could still court a quality team, they would probably be bringing her back. But they can't do it. This here's on Yahoo Sports. Satou Sabally is not expected to re-sign with the Mercury. Sabally should be with multiple teams once negotiations open up. So Satou Sabally done in Phoenix already. It was a short run. They had a shot in the championship, but it did not work out.
Here's the reality Phoenix is dealing with, and it's the same shift that's about to reshape the entire league. The new CBA changed everything, making it nearly impossible to pay 3 max-level players while still building a deep, competitive roster, because the numbers simply don't add up. With Brittany Griner already secured, Diana Taurasi still commanding respect and salary even late in her career, and Kahleah Copper coming off a breakout season deserving of a major deal, meaning someone was always going to be the odd one out. But what makes this situation so compelling is that Satou Sabally held the leverage at 29 years old, entering her prime, and offering a rare skill set as a near 7-footer who can handle the ball, score efficiently, and stretch defenses, averaging around 18 points and 8 rebounds while shooting 37% from beyond the arc, which doesn't just make her worthy of a max contract, it makes her the kind of player teams build entire franchises around.
Get real whiny, real complaining, and y'all know Satou want a max. She complained all last season. I want my money. She don't care. She want the bag. Who is gonna cough up the dough for Satou Sabally?
I can absolutely see teams like the Golden State Valkyries, Portland's incoming franchise, and Toronto's expansion squad all making aggressive moves to land Satou Sabally on a max deal and position her as their clear number 1 option, because she's going to have no shortage of interest and could instantly create a massive impact, especially for brand new teams that need a defining star rather than trying to build around role players and hope, since what they really need is someone who can walk into the arena and immediately shift the culture. And Sabally has the talent and presence to do exactly that, whether it's in Golden State or elsewhere, giving her the chance to finally be the primary focal point from day one, something she never fully had with the Phoenix Mercury while Diana Taurasi still led the way. But there's also real risk involved, because Sabally has a track record, having pushed her way out of the Dallas Wings earlier in her career and being outspoken, sometimes to the point of distraction, about her contract situation, meaning any franchise offering a max deal is betting that once she becomes the centerpiece and gets paid, the concerns will settle. Yet the Wings already experienced how elite talent doesn't automatically translate to chemistry, even with strong pieces around her, and now Phoenix finds itself in a similar position, losing a high-level player after just one season, which starts to look like a pattern worth paying attention to.
Is going to be very, very, very interesting to see. Okay, it's a bunch of free agents out there. I think the Golden State Valkyries could make a big-time push for Satou. I could definitely see the Golden State Valkyries making a push for Satou. I could see Portland, Toronto. I could see these teams making a push to bring in Satou Sabally on a max deal and have her be the number 1 option on the team. She's going to have plenty of suitors. She's going to have plenty of suitors, and I think she's gonna make a big time splash.
I can easily see teams like the Golden State Valkyries, along with the upcoming Portland and Toronto expansion franchises, making serious pushes to land Satou Sabally on a max contract and install her as their clear number 1 option, because she's going to attract a ton of interest and has the kind of presence that can immediately create a major impact, especially for new organizations that need a true centerpiece rather than trying to piece things together with role players, since what they really need is someone who can walk into the building and instantly shift the culture. And Sabaly has the talent to be that player anywhere, stepping into Golden State or another market as the primary option from day one, something she never fully had with the Phoenix Mercury while Diana Taurasi remained the focal point. But there's also a real layer of risk here, because Sabaly has a track record, having pushed her way out of the Dallas Wings earlier in her career and being openly vocal, sometimes to the point of distraction, about her contract situation. So any franchise offering her a max deal is essentially betting that once she's paid and made the centerpiece, those concerns will settle. Yet Dallas already learned that talent alone doesn't guarantee chemistry, even with strong pieces around her, and now Phoenix finds itself in a similar situation, losing a high-level player after just one season, which starts to look less like coincidence and more like a pattern worth watching.
Skylar Diggins. Now, Skylar Diggins put out something where she wrote a letter to her home state in Indiana, and how she's talking about there's nothing like playing basketball in Indiana. Are you trying to make a ploy for the Indiana Fever to come get you? I'm going to be honest. I'm out. I'm all the way out on Skylar Diggins joining Caitlin Clark in the Indiana Fever. I want nothing to do with it. I have watched. I saw what Skylar Diggins was doing. Jewel Lloyd wanted nothing to do with Skylar Diggins, NECA, and the coach up there in Seattle. Jewel Lloyd didn't want nothing to do with them. I got to keep it real. I remember Skylar Diggins arguing a lot in Phoenix when she was with Diana Taurasi and the Mercury and all that. I don't want nothing to do with Skylar Diggins being in.
Now shift to the other major free agency storyline unfolding as Skylar Diggins-Smith drops what feels like a full-on love letter to Indiana, sharing an emotional message about growing up there, about basketball being more than just a sport but a way of life, calling herself a product of that culture and making it clear she's never lost connection to her roots. And the timing couldn't be more interesting, because the Indiana Fever are coming off the biggest season in league history, fueled by Caitlin Clark, selling out every game, breaking viewership records, and now heading into a position with cap space and roster flexibility, right as Diggins-Smith, a University of Notre Dame legend and Indiana native, publicly embraces the idea of coming home, which on the surface sounds perfect. A veteran point guard guiding a rising superstar, a hometown return story that writes itself. But underneath that narrative sits a serious concern, because Diggins-Smith also brings complications that Indiana may not be in a position to take on right now.
I'm sorry, I'm good. And you're probably going to be expecting to log heavy minutes. We don't need that type of backup. We need somebody that's going to come play 8 to 10 minutes in mind and go on, be quiet, go on about their business, be a team player. I don't have time for Skylar Diggins. You know, I think she's a good player. She's a good point guard, but I feel like it's a lot of drama that be following her in this league. And I just don't want nothing to do. I don't want nothing to do with these old guard players. I'm gonna be real. I don't want nothing to do with them. But let's take a look at what Skylar Diggins had to say in this heartfelt message to Indiana. And I kind of want to, this is a certain part I really want to get to, and then I'll play the entire thing. Let's take a look.
Stays with you.
Let's break down Skylar Diggins-Smith's track record, because the pattern is hard to ignore. The Seattle Storm moved on from her quickly, with head coach Noel Quinn essentially deciding after one season that it wasn't the right fit, and before that, during her time with the Phoenix Mercury, there were well-documented tensions, including clashes with Diana Taurasi. So while her talent as a starting-level point guard has never been in question, the recurring issue has been the friction that seems to follow her from team to team, and that's exactly what the Indiana Fever don't need right now, because they already have Caitlin Clark firmly established as the face of the franchise and the primary ball handler coming off a historic rookie season where she led the league in assists, alongside Kelsey Mitchell navigating her own contract situation and adjusting to new head coach Stephanie White. Plus, Aaliyah Boston continuing her growth into a dominant interior presence, meaning the last thing this roster needs is another high-usage personality expecting significant minutes and touches, because Diggins-Smith isn't coming in to play a limited bench role. At 34, she still views herself as a starter and a primary playmaker, but with the offense already running through Clark, the real question becomes where exactly she would fit without disrupting what's already working.
return to play at home in Indiana, where they live and die basketball. And I respect that. I understand that. I respect the fact that I watched Skylar Diggins come up. I remember her playing in the All-American game, being a fan of her as a kid at Notre Dame. She was the hottest thing smoking in college basketball, okay?
And here's the deeper layer to this. Skylar Diggins-Smith was a full-blown superstar at University of Notre Dame, and if NIL had existed back then, she likely would have been a millionaire before ever stepping onto a WNBA court. That's how big her presence was, with endorsements, national attention, and the spotlight firmly on her as one of the faces of women's college basketball. And that kind of status isn't easy to move on from, especially now as she watches Caitlin Clark receive that same level of attention, but magnified on an entirely different scale due to social media and the current cultural moment, getting the visibility, financial opportunities, and admiration that players of Diggins-Smith's era never fully experienced, creating a potentially complicated dynamic that goes beyond basketball and into identity, legacy, and recognition.
No. We already got to deal with old guard Stephanie White. We already got to deal with Bree Turner and pushing her messages. It's a lot going on right now. I don't have the capacity. This team doesn't have the capacity to deal with a Skylar Diggins. She's going to want to come home and be treated a certain way. Listen, I just want a role player as a backup. I think Skylar Diggins will be a good get for another team that needs a veteran point guard. She's a legitimate starter. She's no scrub. She can hoop. She's a starting point guard in this league. I don't want to deal with Skylar Diggins on the Indiana Fever. That's just me and my stance.
Here, ball really is life.
Here, ball is life. Listen, man, shout out to Skylar Diggins. Good luck in free agency. I'm out. That's all. I'm not trying to get crazy. I'm just saying I'm out. We got our face of the franchise at the point guard position in Caitlin Clark. I don't need other players coming here trying to take the ball out of her hands. We already dealing with a lot with this whole Kelsey Mitchell, Stephanie White dynamic. It's too much. It's too much. I think she'd be a good pickup. Look, Chicago Sky needs somebody. Connecticut Sun probably could use a guard. I don't know. I don't know where you're going to go. I just don't want it around Caitlin Clark. I'm just keeping it all the way real. I don't know. I don't know where you're going to go, but I don't want it to be the Indiana Fever. Get down in the comments and let me know what you.
So when you put everything together, what we're really seeing is the new CBA forcing teams into impossible choices, where Phoenix had 3 max-level players and could realistically keep only 2, choosing Brittany Griner and Kalia Copper while Satu Sabaly walks. And this isn't a one-off situation. It's something that's about to ripple across the entire league, with teams like Connecticut Sun dealing with their own max contract pressures, Los Angeles Sparks trying to hold their core together, and Minnesota Lynx facing a closing window with a veteran roster, while expansion franchises like the Golden State Valkyries, Portland, and Toronto suddenly become major power players with the cap space to offer max deals without sacrificing depth, giving them the ability to promise stars a chance to be the face of something new, which for someone like Sabaly, who's been vocal about wanting recognition and top-tier pay, is extremely appealing. But here's the part no one is really addressing: what happens when those expansion teams realize that handing out max contracts doesn't automatically translate into winning, because the WNBA isn't built like the NBA where one superstar can carry an average roster deep into the playoffs. The talent level across the league is too strong and the competition too tight, meaning success depends on chemistry, defined roles, and a functioning system. So if you're talking about Sabaly leading a roster filled with expansion picks and minimum contracts, the real question becomes whether that formula can actually produce wins or if it just creates another top-heavy team without the balance needed to compete. They don't really have a choice, because building purely through the draft isn't realistic in a league with only 3 rounds, so expansion teams have to make a splash in free agency to generate excitement and sell tickets, which is exactly why Satu Sabaly is so appealing as a face of the franchise signing. But the real question comes 2 years down the line. If a team like the Golden State Valkyries is stuck near the bottom while committing a huge portion of their cap to one player, what's the next move? Because max money alone doesn't guarantee success, and that brings us back to the Indiana Fever situation with Skylar Diggins-Smith, which is a completely different kind of challenge. Since Indiana doesn't need another star with Caitlin Clark already in place, They need role players who fit cleanly and don't disrupt chemistry, and Diggins-Smith, despite her talent, has never really been that type of player, having always operated as a primary guard, a lead option, and a vocal presence, so expecting her to step into a reduced role behind Clark would mean asking her to fundamentally change who she's been throughout her career. And while there are teams that could make more sense for her, like the Chicago Sky building around Angel Reese, or the Connecticut Sun if they lose Alyssa Thomas, Indiana feels more like a feel-good narrative than a logical basketball fit, especially when you factor in age, with Diggins-Smith at 34 and likely having only a couple of high-level seasons left, while the Fever are building long-term around a young core of Clark, Aaliyah Boston, and Kelsey Mitchell, making it hard to justify investing major resources into a timeline that doesn't align. And on top of all that, there's the broader dynamic playing out across the league, the subtle tension between the veteran generation that helped build the WNBA and the new wave now receiving unprecedented attention and financial opportunities, a shift that adds another layer of complexity to where someone like Diggins-Smith ultimately fits moving forward. In that veteran group, she's already spoken openly about feeling undervalued, and putting someone like Skylar Diggins-Smith in the same locker room as Caitlin Clark, who represents the exact kind of attention and opportunity the older generation didn't fully receive, could easily create tension or resentment, which is why the situation becomes so delicate, because what we're really seeing now is Sada Sabaly preparing to get paid, likely by an expansion franchise like the Golden State Valkyries. That's desperate to make an immediate splash, where she becomes the face of a new identity and a max contract centerpiece, while the Phoenix Mercury try to retool around Brittany Griner and Kalia Copper, hoping they can replace lost production through depth, turning it into a gamble on both sides, and meanwhile Diggins-Smith will still attract interest, but the real question is whether the Indiana Fever are wise enough to avoid a bad fit, because what they actually need is a steady backup point guard who can run the system when Caitlin Clark rests without demanding a spotlight, and that has never really been her role, so forcing that Indiana narrative connection would be risky, especially as the new CBA continues to reshape the league, breaking up talent concentrations, dismantling potential super teams, and pushing franchises into tough financial decisions where even successful cores become expensive to maintain, creating a free agency environment that is far less predictable than before and putting expansion teams at the center of the league's next competitive shift. If the Golden State Valkyries handle their roster building correctly around Sada Sabaly, balancing talent with fit instead of just stacking names, they absolutely have a real shot at becoming playoff-ready quickly. But if they chase big contracts without cohesion, they risk turning a promising expansion launch into years of instability, and that same pressure applies to Portland and Toronto as they enter the league, because this is their rare chance to build structure from scratch the right way. And for the Indiana Fever, the decision on Skylar Diggins-Smith would say a lot about their direction, whether they're fully committed to building around Caitlin Clark with smart-fitting, role-defined pieces, or whether they lean into nostalgia and emotional storylines that don't necessarily match basketball needs. With Clark already operating as the engine of the offense, alongside Aaliyah Boston and Kelsey Mitchell forming a strong young core, Indiana is in a position where every roster move should be about fit, spacing, and chemistry rather than name value or sentiment. As for Sabaly, her path is the most straightforward but also the most volatile. She's clearly positioned to become the focal point somewhere, likely with a franchise like Golden State or another expansion market, but whether that turns into winning or just a heavy usage role on a developing team will depend entirely on how smartly that roster is constructed around her.